Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Shirley Vargas, and I am the administrator for the Office of Coordinated School and District Support. And I'm joined by my colleague, Lane Carr, who is the Director of Accountability. And together, we're going to be sharing with you a little bit about AQuEST and the system of support, as well as talking about the board's role in school improvement. I'm going to share my screen so you can follow us along in our presentation today.
Wonderful. Yes, welcome and thanks for joining again. And as Shirley mentioned, I'm Lane Carr. I'm just excited to be able to present to you about AQuEST and our system of support. But we would be remiss if we did not pause to acknowledge the unique situation that we are all in right now. COVID-19 has certainly affected all of us in different ways. And while we're all in the same storm, we're not in the same boat. And so while I hope that you are all well, I also know that this conversation about accountability is so important right now. And many of the factors that we're going to speak about, many of the student groups that we're going to speak about have been differently impacted. So keep that in mind, allow that to magnify the conversations that we have today. And also just know that we're very thankful for your leadership and the supports you've been giving to students, to your staff members, and ultimately to the communities that you serve. So we have three main objectives, as Shirley started to outline. The first is just to provide some context about AQuEST, our accountability and support system. We're also going to dig in a little bit deeper about the difference between continuous improvement and school improvement. It sounds like semantics, but it's actually a really important conversation and an important difference. And then finally, we're going to talk about you and your role in school improvement and how we can really support our schools and the things that we can do together to improve for all students.
We also want to make sure that we ground the session in the mission and goals that we have for our department, ensuring that we lead and support the preparation of all Nebraskans for learning, earning, and living, and the three major goals that ground our work, ensuring that everyone has access to opportunities, ensuring their readiness for life beyond school at the with their school within their schools, and then lastly, ensuring that we're doing everything within our role as an agency to provide that leadership and support. We also want to provide you our definition for educational equity and ensuring that students have meaningful access to those resources that they need when they need them, and ensuring that they are met, that they have access to and are living up to their highest potential and have high expectations for learning. And then the last thing that we want to set the context is some of the core beliefs for with which we operate in our agency, and specifically core beliefs related to school improvement, which is what we'll talk about today. And we love to start by ensuring that we're taking an asset-based approach and really valuing the work that's taking place in our schools. Second is around the fact that every school can and should continue to improve in the work that they do. Third is demography is not destiny. Often students, depending on their identity markers, may already, in fact, believe something about themselves. And it's important that we know that because of a student's identity marker does not necessarily predetermine what their outcome will be in life. And then lastly, school improvement is in fact fundamentally about equity and ensuring that we're providing the supports when necessary.
Excellent. Thanks, Shirley. So our first objective today is to really talk about AQuEST. And if you're not familiar, AQuEST is an acronym for a quality education system today and tomorrow. It's around 5 years old. And if you'll go to the next slide, you'll really be able to see that AQuEST is about more than just accountability. Our state board 5 years ago set out this vision that was about more than just assessment scores and really about the fundamental aspects of schools, the tenets that we hope to see present in every school. You'll see those here and also in one of your handouts. And you'll notice that leadership is primary, is so important as we talk throughout today and throughout our conversations around AQuEST, accountability, and school improvement. So I invite you to check out this document, check out the AQuEST webpage, and think critically about how you're infusing these 6 tenets and leadership into all of the work that you do. I often get asked, why do we even need an accountability system? What's the purpose? And it comes down to 5 basic things. The first is that we have to. And it's a state and federal mandate. We have state statute as well as our federal education law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, that mandates certain aspects of what we're going to detail down below. More importantly, though, I think, is that it sets a standard for all schools to ensure that students that are graduating from Auburn have the same opportunities or the equal opportunities as those that are graduating from Sioux County. It ensures that we're responsible with the taxpayer investment and helps us at the department and with our partners to better focus those funds for improvement. We're going to talk a lot about equity, and we're going to talk a lot about achievement gaps and those opportunity gaps that precede achievement gaps. Our accountability system helps us understand where those gaps are and then helps us also think through the strategies necessary to provide supports to close them. And finally, that creating a framework for school improvement. As you'll see, this is right alongside of that as well. So what are we measuring in our accountability system? Well, we have these things that are called indicators. And basically, at its most basic level, an indicator is just a measure of some sort of student achievement. We automatically think of assessment scores, but it's other things that might be included, like graduation rate or progress toward English language proficiency for our English learners. Almost 7% of our students in the state are learning English right now as a second language or a third or fourth language, a world language, right? So we have to also understand how students are doing and progressing towards that proficiency in reading, writing, speaking, and listening in English. And finally, chronic absenteeism is something that we've been trying to hit really hard over the last couple of years, and then specifically during this time of COVID. Chronic absenteeism is defined as a student who misses 10% of their time in membership. So we're really focused on the reduction of that chronic absence. In this last year, we had almost 31,000 students who were chronically absent in only 3/4 of school, right? And that time before we went to remote. So we know that students are missing, and that the first thing that we can do as partners and as education leaders is focus on that attendance and the positive aspects that we can get students into school. So the first question I want to pose to you is thinking about those indicators that we just had on the screen about assessment scores, graduation rates, progress towards English language proficiency, and chronic absence. The first question that we'll just give you as kind of a self-reflection is, how much time does your board spend discussing achievement? So take some time to think about that, and then also to think, how could you direct that conversation a little bit further? So part of my job is annually classifying schools. This is a state law. So we have a classification system that puts schools in a rating system of excellent, great, good, and needs improvement. And you can see that in 2018 and 19, which was the last year that we did this, that we had a rough bell curve for where our schools were. We have fundamentally good schools, and we know that they all can improve, as Shirley mentioned. So whether they're excellent, they can improve. And certainly those that are in needs improvement need more support to improve, which Shirley's going to detail further below. So in addition to classifying schools, one of the parts of our jobs is also to think about how we support schools differently. We know that there isn't enough time, isn't enough money to give every school what they need. So we have to be really smart about targeting those resources. We have 3 ways that we designate schools for further supports. The first is comprehensive support and improvement. There were 27 CSI schools this last time that we designated those schools. We also have priority schools, our most intensive support for schools. It's schools that are in the lowest performing needs improvement status and also demonstrate a great need for those improvement efforts. And we have 4 schools that we're currently investing time, effort, and resources into right now. And then finally is targeted support and improvement and additional targeted support and improvement. And this is all about student group performance. And when we say student groups, we're really speaking about the following groups. So we are talking about the 7 racial and ethnic groups, as you can see on this screen, as well as economically disadvantaged students, those that are receiving free and reduced price lunch, those English learners, once again, and students with disabilities. And we're looking at how they're performing in comparison to their peers across the state. Are the students within that group, how are they doing? You may be a great school by our classification, but need to zoom in and see how that student group is doing. We list this map just to show you the extent of the challenge and the opportunity with TSI and ATSI. You can see students with disabilities represents the largest student group, one that we are absolutely committed to at the department with our ESU partners. And now I'm imploring you as well to think through the specific supports that might be necessary for your students with disabilities and all of these student groups as well. You can see it's not just a Lincoln and Omaha issue, but really that these schools, the TSI and ATSI, those student group performance is really statewide. And if you're curious about where you might find information about your school, you can actually go to the Nebraska Education Profile. And that's just nep.education.ne.gov. And you'll find your school. You can actually compare some things around peer schools, schools that are like the ones that you represent as well. Download data, manipulate that data in your own spreadsheets, etc. And always, we're glad to provide that data to your superintendent, certainly, and to your principals, but also to you if it is requested. So that is an AQuEST in a nutshell. And I want to just, again, give a moment to pause and ask you this question. How much time does your board spend with the community talking about student expectations and those high expectations for students, and then leveraging that high expectation to get what you need to get it done, to make sure that students are successful and are on track for their current grade level?
Great. So now we're going to transition to our next segment in our presentation that talks about, so now that you've been identified with whatever classification or designation, how do we transition that to the type of support you might be able to tap into, or support that you will continue to receive based on that designation and classification? So we first want to start off by clarifying language and ensuring that when we talk about improvement, that we're being really intentional about what type of improvement we're engaging in. So many of us, every single district engages in continuous improvement work. There's no fixed time frame. It's continuous, it's ongoing. You probably do this also with your strategic planning work, right? You're always striving to get better and make sure that you have everything in place for student, teachers, and leaders, right? And it's really grounded on reflection, growth, adaptation. But when I talk about school improvement, I'm being very specific around dramatic and comprehensive interventions for lowest performing schools or lower performing schools or underperforming schools. These schools that have been identified through a variety of indicators to, need additional support to ensure that they're continuously improving on an ongoing basis. And we really focus around leadership, teacher development, instructional transformation, and then the actual student and staff culture. So those 4 areas are really critical, because if we think back to AQuEST and the domains and the tenants, right, these are an even deeper dive into that work. So you'll see here how we just highlight school improvement for this aspect here. And then we wanted to provide you an explicit example, and maybe something in the medical field. I know often, educators, look to the medical field for some analogies to help us think through, well, how do we do these things concurrently? So I apologize in advance if you or your loved one is experiencing any health issues, but we wanted to provide a specific health example that could, visualize both of these things happening simultaneously. So you visit a doctor, you have a headache, they do a diagnosis, provide you some medication potentially, but you don't stop doing other things that you already have been doing, like eating a healthy, balanced diet, like engaging, in exercise and, brushing your teeth, right? So there's a level, there's certain things that are happening here, right? You identify that there's some symptoms, which means that that's a signal for improvement, right? Then you go through through this process where there's a needs assessment, identifying what's at the root of the problem, addressing that root cause with the appropriate intervention, and you're continuously doing everything else simultaneously. So this is just a quick analogy of what that experience is like in relation to applying it to school as well. So this is just a quick graphic of what we saw Lane talk about with the 6 AQuEST tenants and leadership. And then you also see here a graphic of the rapid school improvement 4 domains. So this is just a deeper dive, like I mentioned before, around leadership, teacher development, instructional transformation, and culture. So a quick self-reflection question we want to pose to you is, how much time does your board spend influencing, adopting, and monitoring those long-range and annual improvement goals that you have in order to improve student learning, right? Really thinking about how often you're engaging in that continuous process, and that you're a part of that process, and that process isn't done to you, but you're in fact are an author and an actor in that work, and how critical that is. So now we're going to switch to, well, what's the improvement model that we're operating from? So Lane described earlier how every single school is classified into excellent, great, good, or needs improvement. But not every single school is then designated for a different level of support. So if we're taking an MTSS pyramid model, we see that at the very bottom are supports, and something that every single school has access to and is able to engage in. And the further we move up into the pyramid or the triangle here, the more intense and the more focused those supports become, right? So you can say like tier 1, right? Things that everyone has access to. As you move into tier 2, so to speak, we're seeing the designated schools based on student group performance. And as we move further up, we're seeing that these are more comprehensive school and even system-wide improvement efforts that must be made with additional support. So what I'd like to do is just present to you some of those examples of how that actually plays out. So in our first tier, right, where all schools, we're seeing these general universal supports, the instructional materials work that our teaching, learning, and assessment office has been leading, you know, the framework visits that you engage in around your 5-year continuous improvement accreditation visits, any other technical assistance you may need. Now, when we transition to our student group performance designation, we're seeing that there's some additional tools that you can tap into around a needs assessment, around root cause analysis frameworks, around modules that are self-paced for teachers and leaders. And then lastly, the newest thing we have is virtual learning communities that leaders and teachers can engage in. And that's a collaboration across multiple stakeholder groups to engage around those student group areas that we talked about earlier. With our comprehensive support and improvement schools, these are our lowest 5% Title I schools. And here we're seeing the support intensify and increase. So now we have monthly meetings where I and a few others lead that learning with teachers and leaders. We have some support in writing SMART goals, and that those action plans are evidence-based, based on the needs of the district or the school. We also have some supports for leaders through an initiative called the Nebraska Leadership and Learning Network. And lastly, the needs assessment, but this time it's not just access to, but actually support in deploying that at the school level. And then lastly, with our priority schools, our state statute requires an intervention team. So that is something that is led by myself and a couple of other people. They're on-site consultants. There's an additional layer of support there to actually implement the work. So how good is it if you write a plan, but then you don't actually implement the plan the way in which you intended, or don't make adjustments based on data that you get? And that's a discrete difference with our priority schools than with some of our other schools here. So one question I'd like to leave you with here for a self-reflection is, how much time does your board spend mobilizing the community to support the goals for improving student learning? And what I would like to mention here that I didn't mention in the previous slide is that what we've also seen here is the importance of school boards in facilitating that improvement effort, and how important it is for school board members who are members of the community to also ensure that the goals are being met and that we're making appropriate action to do that. So we'll take a minute to think about that there.
So that's a lot. TSI, CSI, ATSI, needs improvement, MTSS, all of these words, right? And the question that you may have is, what can I do about it? What's in my power? What is my responsibility across all of these to ensure that our teachers have, and our principals have, and our superintendents have those tools that Shirley mentioned, and the resources that Shirley mentioned to really make sure that we're improving and focus on improving. Two resources that Shirley and I want to offer to you. One is attached or in your materials. It's 8 characteristics of effective boards. We're going to talk about that just a little bit in a moment. And the other is a book, which is around improving school board effectiveness. We're going to touch on just the first part of it, and then would ask you or also leave you or charge you with the idea that this could be a really important professional development for you and your team. So when we look at the high achieving districts, or those districts that have pivoted from lower performing to higher performing or improving, we see basically around 8 or so characteristics of these schools. Sorry, 6 characteristics of these schools. And that is school wide, right? So it's from the board down to the teachers, to the paras, to the students, right? And what's happening there. It includes clear goals and extensive use of data, those first 2 together. It ensures that there is a structure in place for schools to innovate, to try things, to research, to implement new strategies. It's this idea of professional learning, again, learning at the board level, the principal, superintendent, and leadership level, all the way down to students. Engagement with parents and the community, and then strong leadership across all of those levels, really highlighting, once again, you can see and hear those 6 tenets of AQuEST strewn about these 6 items of high achieving and high performing districts.
And what we also see are similar to the exact image that we saw 2 slides ago that Lane mentioned around 8 characteristics of effective school boards. We wanted to make sure we presented them to you here so that you can see how they kind of put a bow, so to speak, around what we've been discussing so far today, right? So there has to be a vision of high expectations and student achievement and quality instruction. And it starts with you all as board members and setting that policy direction and vision. There's also the need to have strong shared beliefs and values about what's possible for students. They're accountability driven and focus on policies to improve student achievement. There's this collaborative nature and collaborative relationship with not only the board and within the board and the superintendent, but the community at large and with the staff as well. Additionally, we know that data is critical to everything that we do. So board members and effective boards are data savvy and use that data for continuous improvement efforts. Align and sustaining resources are also critical in thinking about professional development that is needed to meet district goals. And that it's a united team, right? We know that especially during these times, how divisive things can be, but it's important that as a board, working together with the superintendent to facilitate that strong collaboration and trust that's needed to lead as a united team. And then lastly, what's so important with continuous improvement is also continuous learning. So that team development and learning and training, even sometimes with superintendents, it's critical in the work that is leading to effective school boards. So we have a couple of questions that we'd like to leave you with as our final reflections. And we start with, what are some ways in which you and your board are committed to creating urgency for improving achievement for students? There's also, thinking about, how do we commit to high expectations for all students and ensuring that we provide the appropriate supports so that students can achieve. And then lastly, how can you and your board commit to applying pressure, providing the supports to meet those needs? So making sure that, we're engaging with a variety of stakeholders and ensuring that we're communicating those goals with everyone so that everyone is clear about what we're trying to achieve in our district. And I'll see if Lane would like to add anything to the final reflection here.
No, I mean, just as we at the state apply that pressure, that accountability, and supply that support, we hope that you will do the same, right? This idea of a kind of a push and a pull, especially now, as you mentioned, Shirley, the absolute need to have a grasp on what our schools and what our students and teachers need is just so important. So however we can use that data to then move to action, I think is really important. So thank you for allowing us to share with you today. Feel free to reach back out if we said something that isn't sitting right or that is sitting really well and you want to follow up. Please let us know. You can reach out to our emails here, and you can also check out our website, My website is just AQuESTT.com. And then Shirley's office is the Coordinated School and District Support website, which can be found on the NDE's page as well. So thank you once again for joining us today. Thank you for your attention to this topic. And more importantly, or most importantly, thanks for your service to our schools and communities.
Great. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your conference.